This is an SABC News presentation.
Well, good morning and welcome to our midweek edition of A View from the House, coming to you live from the National Legislature in Cape Town. My name is Asanda Mbeche. Well, it's budget day and all eyes will be on Finance Minister Mr. Pravin Gordhan when he presents the 2013-2014 National Budget Policy Statement in a joint sitting of Parliament this afternoon. Now, speculation on what to expect from the budget presentation later this afternoon dominates news this morning. That's all everybody's talking about. And to get a sense of what really matters to elected representatives in Parliament, we're joined by Mr. Tim Harris from the DA. We have Mr. Steve Swart from the ACDP and Mr. Thaba Mufamadi from the ANC, who's also chairperson of the Finance Portfolio Committee. Good morning, gentlemen, and welcome.
Morning, Asanda.
Let's get to it. Tim, for the DA, what are the priority issues that you want the Finance Minister to address today?
Well, I think the Finance Minister needs to tackle head-on the concerns raised by the rating agencies. Over the past few months, you've seen every single rating agency downgrade South Africa's debt. This is bad for the country. It creates an environment of a lack of confidence in our economy. So by tackling their concerns, by tackling high debt levels, by implementing some of the ideas in the National Development Plan to restore the institutional capacity of the state, I think he can start restoring confidence in South Africa's economy.
Mr. Swart, for the ACDP, what's priority number one?
Well, linked to that, obviously the Minister is going to, and we hope he will address the whole issue of economic growth. To what degree is it increasing? To what degree is it decreasing? And how does that translate to revenue collection? And then, of course, how does that impact on government expenditure and our debt levels?
Mr. Mufamadi, taking on what the DA and the ACDP have raised as concerns that they want the Minister to address, it seems that there's very little room for him to maneuver. But what are the things that remain priority that the ANC still wants addressed by this year's budget?
Well, I think the first thing that I must say is that we must really congratulate the Minister for the work that he has done in the past. He walked into this office when the world was just going through terrible times economically. One of the things that is the ANC would want to see happening is that unemployment needs to be tackled, particularly youth unemployment, but also is a consolidation phase for the ANC in terms of what we have been able to achieve in education. We need to make sure that resources that are allocated consolidate the gains that have been made. NHI, National Health Insurance, I think the pilot project that on the ground should actually be strengthened so that we put more impetus in ensuring that that program is not stalled. Thirdly, in the area of health also, in the area of education, health, and also youth and employment, as I said earlier on. But entrepreneur development also is quite critical, because if we want to stimulate jobs, we must talk about entrepreneurship and the development of SMMEs.
Talking about creating jobs, the infrastructure program, the national rollout, has been key amongst the messages of the ruling party over the past 2 years. But what room is there to find funding for the infrastructure program?
Well, if you go back in terms of our MTF, medium-term expenditure framework, it has been clearly indicated to the extent to which in the next 3 years we'll be able to fund the infrastructure programs. Key to that, I think, is to make sure that capital expenditure does reach the ground, and the capacity in at that level needs to be looked into at all spheres of government. In fact, for me, I think what the Minister should be focusing on is how best do we make sure that there is no underspending on capital infrastructure projects.
Mr. Harris, looking at the infrastructure program, do you think expectations on how to fund it are realistic in light of slowing economic growth?
Well, there are two problems with the infrastructure program. The chairperson's already focused on the capacity issue. We every year see big numbers around infrastructure. Last year there was a commitment to spend 266 billion in 2011 rather, and when we looked at the actual spending, it came in just over 200 billion. Over the period of President Zuma's presidency, this government has underspent by around 22% per year on infrastructure. So clearly there's a problem with capacity to be able to spend the budgets that are allocated to infrastructure. In 2010, the parastatals only spent 60% of their infrastructure budgets. So the first thing that the Finance Minister needs to announce reforms that are going to improve the quality of the spending. But in terms of raising new funding, which we do need to do, we'd really like to see equity deals become part of the package. Brazil recently sold 51% of their largest airport and raised 71 billion rand from that deal. Now, these kinds of partial privatization deals are off the table for ideological reasons, and we think that's really short-sighted.
Mr. Harris, we'll take that up a little bit later on, but let's get ideas from the SCDP around funding for the infrastructure program.
Well, what we've seen with parastatals is that they are trying to fund it off their own balance sheets. The difficulty to a certain degree with that, if one takes the example of Eskom, is that they are funding their capital expenditure through tariff increases, and that has caused quite an outrage with the public, with 16% tariff increases being requested. They need to find alternative ways of raising that funds that is relating to parastatals. When it comes to government capex expenditure, clearly there is a problem with capacity and underspending, and that needs to be addressed from the side of Treasury and, of course, from our side as the Finance Committee.
Talking about capacity and the need to do all those things, Mr. Mafamadi, does the ruling party have the political will to push through to ensure that the public service does implement these things that are being mentioned here about spending and doing the priorities right?
Well, I think as much as I agree with my colleagues that capacity is a problem, but I don't agree that that which the state does is inefficient at all times. I can simply say and safely say, if you look into the infrastructure programs that we have been engaged in the past probably 6 or 7 years now, I am certain that you'll then agree that indeed there is progress that has been made. Of course, there's still lack of capacity at some levels that could actually be improved, and I think that's what we are looking at, and there is a political will to deal with those aspects.
So what's your view on what actually needs to be improved? Because Mr. Mafamadi says the political will is there. Treasury is making all the necessary funds available. What is it that you think needs to be done right to get things going?
Well, I think this is where the National Development Plan comes in. You heard the President pay lip service to the National Development Plan in his speech, but there were very few practical policies from that plan that were announced in the State of the Nation speech. So we think it's up to the Finance Minister now to start putting some of those plans front and centre. And the NDP deals directly with issues of capacity in the public service. It has ideas for how to hold public servants accountable for the delivery that they serve South Africa with. And we'd like to see some of those very powerful ideas in the NDP front and centre in this year's budget.
Talking about political will to get things done, Steve, you sit in the committees of Parliament. Do you see that in the public service?
Well, there is a political will from the Parliament side. Obviously, from the government side, one does need to hold public officials more accountable, and we saw the announcement now from the Minister of Justice that public servants will be held accountable, they'll be named and shamed, and we think this is a step in the right direction. We need speedy disciplinary action taken against those errant public servants, and of course where government expenditure has been stolen, where money has been stolen, we need criminal action to be instituted to recover those funds. 30 billion rand per year. SIU estimates that is funds that we can collect and should be collected.
Let's hold that thought for a moment. We have to go to a commercial break. Stay tuned.